Hello and welcome to the Black Hat Bushcraft channel. Today I wanted to take the next step in this navigation series and talk about dead reckoning. Dead reckoning is when you keep track of your azimuths and your pace count over the course of navigating from one point to another point, and then at any given time that you want to determine from where you are to get back to any other point or to get back to where you came from, you can come down to the ground literally and use some very minimal tools to determine what the azimuth is to get from where you are to any of those points that you've been to with a direct route. Let's say that we've traveled from point A to B to C to D, and we want to get directly from D back to A. We haven't traveled that exact course yet, so we have no idea what the azimuth is. If you understand dead reckoning on the ground, you can easily figure out what that azimuth is, and as long as you've kept track of your pace count, you can determine the approximate distance from D back to A as well. So that's a very valuable tool because it allows you to straight shoot back to home, or it will also allow you to go between points. So maybe instead of going from A to B to C, I might go from A to C or A to D. So I can go from any point to any other point. Using dead reckoning, I can determine what that azimuth is, and as long as I've kept track of the pace count, I'll know the approximate distance as well. So using dead reckoning, in theory, is a very simple process. However, when you go to actually do this on the ground, it can be a little bit tedious just because you're dealing with measurement and you're also using your compass on the ground to help replicate the azimuths that you've shot on your actual course of travel. However, it's a very worthwhile skill to understand. Let's do a little example of this on the ground right now. Just before I get started, I wanted to show you the very basic tools that I'll be using for this process. First of all, I have here two separate measuring devices. The one that I normally carry is just this little rubber seamstress measuring tape. It's very lightweight, it's weatherproof, and it takes up no space in my kit. You can buy these for $1 from your local department store. I also like this little flexi ruler. I like to carry that sometimes. It'll roll up. It's pretty compact, and again, it's very light, and it's useful for other things too where it comes to measuring. I have my notebook with my azimuths and pace count that I actually traveled. You will need your compass for this to help you determine the azimuth on the ground. I have some brightly colored string, which I'm going to use to track my path of travel. And for my azimuth points, I just cut some green sticks here, which I'll use to stake into the ground. All right, so I know that this is not going to show up all that well on camera, but I'm going to do my best to give you an example that will hopefully make sense. All right, to get started, let's say that this stake that I'm driving in the ground right here is my starting point, right? And I know that's a little hard to see. What I'm going to do to make everything a little more visible is hook this orange string onto my home plate right there. Right? So that's the home plate. Now, I have here the exact azimuths I shot and my pace count in meters of the actual course that I traveled and that we're going to graph out here on the ground. The first point from here I traveled to was at 246 degrees for 100 meters. So what I'm going to do is come to my compass bezel and dial 246 onto the dial, or to the bezel I should say. All right, so I've got 246 at 12 o'clock on my compass for the path of travel. I'm going to lay my compass here on the ground right up against my stake, my home plate, and I'm going to position the compass so that the dog is in the doghouse, or red is in the shed, so to speak. And that should be it, about right there. Now, I'm going to use a measurement of my own design. I'm going to say that 1 inch on the ground equals 20 meters of actual travel, okay? So that way I can make a very small scale of what I've actually done out in the field. So now, just parallel with my compass from this pole, I need to go out for 5 inches. So if I put the 5-inch mark here, parallel with the side of the compass, and now I just take one of my little stakes that I cut. Everything's lined up, red's in the shed, and that's the 5-inch mark right there. So now I have my first point from home that I traveled to. What I'm going to do is bring my string right here and drive that down in the ground real good. And I'm going to wrap that around a couple of times just to make it tight. And now I can see from my home to the first point exactly where I traveled. Hopefully that's showing up, okay? Let's do the second point. So the next point I traveled from here was 118 degrees. So I'm gonna dial 118 on my bezel. I've got 118 here at 12 o'clock on the compass. I'm gonna lay that down on the ground against this little stake that I've made, and I'm gonna orient the compass so that red is in the shed right there. Now, that looks right. I traveled that azimuth for 56 degrees. So basically at 3 inches would be 60. So what I'm gonna do, my compass is actually long enough for this. So 3 inches is here, just a little shy of that should be about 56, right there. Again, pace counting is approximate, so I'm doing my best to be accurate with this, but we'll see how it goes, how it comes out. All right, so now I'm gonna bring my string over to my next point. So this was my first point to second to third. My next point was 205 degrees. So I'm gonna dial 205 on the compass bezel, just like we've been doing. I'm gonna lay that down on the ground and position it so that red is in the shed. Now, 205 degrees. I traveled 210 meters. So we figure 1 inch is 20 meters, so 10 inches would be 200 meters. And we traveled 210, so 10.5 inches should be dead on. And that's gonna put me right here. All right, that was the longest leg of my trip on this course. So now I'm gonna pull my string tight, come out here to this next stake, and I can see exactly what that looked like as far as the travel. Now, the next point was 10 degrees. I changed quite a bit there. So 10 degrees on the compass bezel. All right, I come over to this point right here. All right, so red's in the shed, and I traveled that 10 degrees for 120 meters. So again, using our inches, 20, 40, 60, 80, 1, and 20. So 6 inches. Should put me right on the mark. Right here. Now, once again, pulling my string tight, I'm going to come over here to this next point, just wrap it around the stake. You don't want to pull your string too tight, because then that can start to shift your stakes around. So now I went from point A to B, so point A to B to C to D, back to this position. All right, my next azimuth was 102 degrees. I'm going to keep doing these, and then I'll show you what the finished result looked like. All right, so now you can see the entire course that I navigated through here laid out on the ground in a very small scale. This was my starting point, and I shot an azimuth out to a mimosa tree across the field. From there, I shot over to the apple tree. From the apple tree, I took the longest leg of my course to the back corner of the field, shot across the field to the opposite wood line. From there, shot across the field to the opposite corner. And then from there, I shot to the cemetery, and from the cemetery back home. When I got to this point right here, I wanted to check behind myself. And when I lined my compass up, I was about 3 degrees off. Now, you have to consider that this is all laid out based on my pace count, which is not going to be perfect, but approximate, unless you're perfect at pace counting, and I'm not. All right, and also if you figure that the diameter of these sticks over the course of multiple points can throw things off by a subtle amount, I feel like the fact that I was only 3 degrees off from that last point back home was not bad. Some experts may disagree on that, but for me, that's pretty good. So the value of having all this laid out on the ground is now I can determine how to get from any one point to another point. Let's say that I wanted to travel from the cemetery out to the mimosa tree. All I have to do is lay a piece of this string from here to the point I want to travel on, And while I never walked directly from this point to this point, and so I don't know what the azimuth is, I just lay my compass with the direction of travel from the cemetery to the mimosa tree, and now I put red in the shed, and I'll know that the azimuth from the cemetery back to the mimosa tree was 307 degrees. Now, how far do I travel on 370 degree azimuth? Would be 5.5 inches. So that's 20, 40, 60, 80, 110 meters. So 110 meters on that azimuth will take me from the cemetery back to mimosa tree. And that's the beauty of it, is you can determine how to get from any point. Let's look at it a different way. Let's say that I hadn't navigated this last point right here. Let's say that I went from point A to B to C to D to E to F, and now I'm ready to go directly home, exactly where I came from. So we're out in the field at this point, and we want to determine how to get here. All I have to do is lay that string between those 2 points, lay my compass down on the ground, and put red in the shed along that line. Now I know that if I travel on a 344 degree azimuth, all right, so bearing 344 degrees for, how far is it? So 8.5 inches. We figure 20, 40, 60, 80, 120, 40, 60, 70. So 170 yards. So with that, I just determined from this point here back home the exact azimuth and the exact distance that I'd have to travel, or approximate distance I'd have to travel to get there. So now you can see the value in laying this all out on the ground. While you're out in the field, you can determine how to get to any one point that you've been to from any other point. If I'm right here and I want to get back to, let's say, the first point, the mimosa tree, all I have to do is lay the line there, lay my compass on the ground, put red in the shed. That will give me the bearing. At that point, I measure the distance, knowing that every 1 inch is 20 meters. It's roughly 8.25 inches. So we figured 20, 40, 60, 80, 120, 40, 60, and then plus 5, so 165. So there you have roughly your distance, approximate distance to get back to that point. So that's the beauty, is you can now determine how to get from any point to any point that you've traveled to. All right, so I hope that all of that was visible on the camera, and I hope that my example will make sense. However, if you find yourself left with a lot of questions, feel free to ask those questions down below in the comment section, and I'll do my very best to answer those questions as I can. Once again, I reinforce the point that I don't claim to be an expert in navigation. This is just something that I'm interested in and something I've spent a lot of time researching and actually practicing in the field. The value, again, of dead reckoning is it allows you to physically see on the ground where you've been, and it will allow you to determine how to get from where you are back to where you started, or from any of the positions that you've navigated to any of the other positions. So it allows you to go back and forth between points at will. Just using this method on the ground, you can determine the azimuth and the distance approximately based on your pace count. All right, so I hope to be talking to you guys again with the next video in this navigation series very soon. I also have several other things that'll be coming outside of this series, and I'm looking forward to those. I hope that you guys will tune in. I appreciate your interest and your support. And until the next one, take care and God bless.